today we're going to talk more about those that are looking to buy and hold property. And so I want to help you guys understand the terminology or the different acronyms that you're going to hear, what these acronyms mean, so that you can somewhat speak the language of what these buy and hold investors are typically looking at. And when we talk buy and hold, this could be short-term rental, long-term rental, it doesn't make a difference. The way that you analyze numbers on this stuff is going to be very, very similar. So first thing you're going to look at is the total monthly rent. And that is whatever the total, let's assume if it's a single house, it's pretty obvious, right? Whatever the rent is for that house is the total monthly rent. But if you have something that's 2 to 4 units or 10 units, 20 units, 100 units, you're just going to take whatever the total of the rent is for all of the units that are included with the house. So you'll hear that sometimes referred to as TMR, or you'll hear that referred to as total monthly rent. Brian, do you guys have audios? Okay,
Yes.
I'm just making sure. I don't want to talk to myself this whole time. All right, so that's TMR. The second number, the one you don't hear TMR a whole lot, but I just want to make sure you guys understand what that means. The second number, which you'll hear, and this actually gets used in some of the calculations that are important for buy and hold investors, is what's referred to as GSI, or gross scheduled income, and that's on an annual basis. So GSI is the total monthly rent multiplied by 12. So how much money is this property scheduled to bring in a 12-month period based upon the current rents? The next number is what's referred to as VCL, or vacancy and credit loss. This is how much of that that's supposed to come in is going to get lost to vacancy. That number traditionally was 5%, but in this new market, the current vacancy rates are insanely low right now in San Diego. So that is typically estimated at 3%. So what you do next is you have the gross operating income. So what that is it's your total income you're scheduled to receive minus the income, or minus the vacancy and credit loss, minus that 3%, gives you the gross operating income. So let's assume something was going to rent for $100,000 a year. You would take 3% off. Therefore, your gross operating income would be $97,000. The next part of this is operating expenses. And we'll go through an example of one of these here in a little bit to help you guys put all this together. But I want to make sure you guys understand these terms because the terms are important. Next is operating expenses. And this is the one that is most commonly not thought of, misunderstood, screwed up, miscalculated, all of that. A lot of times, and this where even if you never sell a single property to an investor, this one part of today is what's going to help you convince somebody to sell their current home versus renting their current home. Because what most people do is they look at their home and they say, oh, well, my mortgage is only $3,000 a month and I can rent my home for $4,000 a month. So I'm going to cash flow $1,000 when I rent my home out. That's not the case. First, they're not factoring in vacancy because you're going to inevitably have vacancy. But the biggest thing they're not factoring in is the operating expenses, which are estimated at 40% of the gross operating income. What's included in operating expenses? The two big ones are taxes and insurance. That's also going to include repairs, maintenance, utilities, landscaping, all of the various things that are involved with owning an investment property. A lot of people don't factor this 40% in. You got to think if somebody if they got a $3,000 a month mortgage and they can rent their place for $4,000, in their head, they're saying, oh, this is cool. I'll make $1,000 a month. No, you're not. You're going to take 40% of that $4,000 off, which for those that are not strong on math, that's $1,600 a month. It's going to go to operating expenses. You take $1,600 a month off of $4,000, you're left with $2,400. If your mortgage, and now to be clear, I said operating expenses include taxes and insurance. So make sure we're just looking at the principal and interest mortgage payment, not PITI, just principal and interest only. But if your principal and interest is $3,000 and your place rents for $4,000, you're probably going to be losing somewhere around $600 a month on that property. It's actually going to be at a loss, not at a $1,000 a month gain. People all the time screw this up, do not factor in there's going to be operating expenses, and people will say, well, it's a newer property, it's not going to have expenses. Yes, it is. Every property is going to have expenses. And here in San Diego, we don't have a whole lot of newer properties. Most of San Diego was built in the 70s and 80s. So the older the property, a lot of times this number starts to get higher and higher. If you're buying like a 1920s house in North Park, you're probably going to have higher expenses. You're probably going to have more things go wrong with it. At some point, you're probably going to have to replace a roof. You're probably going to have to upgrade an electrical panel. You're probably going to have to replace the cast iron or clay sewer line. You're going to have more expenses these older these properties get. So that number could go up. If you hire property management, that number could go up because most property managers in San Diego are charging like 8 to 10% of collected rents. So just that alone, right? That's taking up 10%. Like it's a huge chunk. So again, taxes, insurance, property management, repairs, maintenance, utilities, upgrades, all of the different things that are required. 40% is the number that's recommended that you calculate this with. And a lot of people will say, well, that seems ridiculous. That can't be right. There's article on top of article on top of article that will support you in this. So one of the things that I found that can be really valuable when I'm talking to somebody who thinks otherwise is there's just type in Zillow rental property operating expenses or average monthly rental expenses, like income property expenses. Like there will be articles on top of articles that will support you. Most of the articles will actually say closer to 40 to 50%, but that's going to be more relevant when you're in a Midwest market or southern market where homes are still selling for like $200,000. The percentage obviously is going to be higher. I used to own stuff in Buffalo, New York, and I would have like a storm door would need to get replaced, and it would cost as much as the total rent coming in, because these things were renting for like $600 a month, and a storm door goes out, and there goes all your rent for the month. So those percentages can be higher in other markets. So if you guys are buying in lower price markets, a lot of times that percentage might be higher in lower price markets. But 40% is kind of the gold standard here in San Diego. And then the last number, which is the most important number, is the net operating income. So that is, you take your gross operating income, subtract your operating expenses, and that's going to give you your net operating income. That's going to give you how much income are you actually going to get from this property at the end of the day. And for most people, especially if they're looking at a buy-sell scenario, once you get down to that net operating income, that number is substantially lower than what they thought it was going to be. And a lot of times you're really bursting people's bubble, but that's exactly what you want to do if you have somebody who's thinking about selling versus renting the house out. Because if they choose to rent the house out, there's a couple things that are going to come into play. One is it's going to become a rental property. And if people have never dealt with tenants, they refer to the 3 T's: tenants, toilets, and trash. It could be an absolute nightmare. Dealing with the headaches. I mean, people are so stupid. I used to manage all my own stuff, and tenants will call back, my light's not working. Okay, have you replaced the bulb? No, can you do that for me? No, you son of a bitch, you replaced the damn light bulb. Like, you're a grown person, go replace your own light bulb. Like the calls you get, or the toilet's clogged. Well, why is the toilet clogged? Because your kid threw a washcloth down the toilet. Like the stuff you deal with as a landlord is insane. It's 100% not worth it 9 times out of 10 for most people. So if somebody chooses to rent the property out, they're probably going to be doing it at a loss. They're going to take on a whole lot of extra headaches and stress. And then the biggest thing is when you sell a home, if you've occupied it 2 of the last 5 years, you can sell it and not pay capital gains on it up to $250K if you're single, $500K if you're married. If you turn it into a rental, once it's past 3 years since you've moved out, that becomes an investment property now. And at whatever point you choose to sell it, now you're subject to paying capital gains tax on it. So what I'll typically show people is option A is we could rent this thing out. And at the end of the day, you're going to lose $600 a month. And you're going to deal with toilets, tenants, and trash. And when you sell this thing, you're now going to incur taxes when you sell this thing of 20 or whatever the tax rate ends up being when you sell it. Option B is you sell this property today because it's been your primary residence, selling this thing $500,000 tax-free today, and you get to tell Uncle Sam, screw you. So do you want to lose $600 a month, deal with tenants, toilets, and trash, and incur taxes when you sell this thing eventually? Or do you want to just sell it now and take all that money tax-free? It's usually a pretty easy conversation for people when you help walk them through that. So I know that's not the topic of the meeting, but it ties into this, because if you ever want to show somebody why they should sell versus rent their house, just run this scenario for them and help them see what it would look like if they did hold their house as a rental. Let them see what that true net operating income is, and they'll realize it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.